Hi everybody, this is Dino Chris from Prehistoric Facts. Sorry about the delay. I didn't have enough time to do the episode yesterday, but even though it was 4th of July, a lot of festivities going on, and I'm pretty sure all of you had a good 4th of July, and hopefully your 4th of July was safe and had a really good time enjoying the fireworks and all the celebrations. And I thought about for this episode, since I didn't get any questions, I thought about maybe doing an episode of basically something American, and I thought maybe doing an episode about history of American paleontology, and I thought why not do that? So this will be an episode about American paleontology, even though this will come down as a regular answering questions episode. Let's actually get started with the history of American paleontology. Now everyone knows that the first place to actually start in American paleontology, basically we would start out with the Bone Wars, but even though I'll actually go a little bit further than that, the first evidence to actually the first evidence of American paleontology actually came around when Thomas Jefferson was actually president. And you see, Thomas Jefferson was a born naturalist, but even though he was one of the founding fathers of the nation, and he was a politician, but he was a really good scientist, and that's what he was, is that he was a scientist. And basically, when he sent out Lewis and Clark for the exploration of the Louisiana Territory, they actually stumbled on some bones, and they sent them to Thomas Jefferson. And basically, Thomas Jefferson actually wrote a few articles about some fossils that he has described. But basically, the fossils that he actually made a huge error was basically he actually had a claw, a really large claw, and he actually thought of it as a giant lion's claw, which basically has the sharp recurved feature and all that. It had a sharp point on it, and basically thought it might have belonged to a carnivore, and that's basically, he thought it almost looks like a lion's claw, But basically, in the 20th century, that scientists actually found out that he was wrong on it. It was pretty much that it was the claw of a giant sloth, and so that actually had that perpetuation of basically Thomas Jefferson was probably one of the first American scientists to actually describe a certain fossil. But then it wouldn't come down to the 19th century. It was when American paleontology really started to take off, and it was basically because of the Bone Wars. And basically, the Bone Wars was basically the feud between Edward Drinker Cope and Othniel Charles Marsh. And now, basically, they started off as colleagues, basically just regular colleagues, just talking about fossils and all that kind of stuff, and pretty much. And if you actually watch the American Experience PBS show called Dinosaur Wars, it was basically about the Bone Wars, and basically you get to learn a lot about it, and pretty much they actually kind of thought let's actually put this feud to an end, and basically Cope took Charles Marsh to a quarry where Drinker Cope was actually digging some fossils, and basically the next day Cope found out that his fossil supply of where he actually found numerous fossils in this quarry had disappeared. And pretty much what he found out was basically the farmer told him that Othniel Charles Marsh actually gave the farmer a lot of money, so that way he would buy the land to actually excavate the fossils. And basically Charles Marsh's team basically took most of the fossils that were there and basically just took them to the University of Yale University, and pretty much And that was when Cope and Marsh really started to feud over like specimens and who actually gets the naming rights and all that kind of stuff. And pretty much that actually was a nasty period in American science, and that was really a point where both of these guys just had like this huge feud that just went for decades, and they never ever settled on anything. It was basically they never like stopped the feud. They never did anything to like stop it. It's because you see they didn't really get along with each other. Well, basically, it's because they were just different personalities. Basically, they had different personalities. Like Cope was more of like the old school type of scientist, and basically Marsh was actually kind of more relying more on a business sense, where basically he wanted to actually make the paleontology more of a business than actually of a science. But even though he still made it a science, but even though he wanted to be more in the business sense, Cope actually wanted to keep it more of a science, and that's what he actually wanted it more. He didn't want it to be a business. And so it wasn't until the mid 1800s it was when fossils in the American West were just popping out, and Cope and Marsh were the top scientists to actually describe fossils, and basically both of them actually had hired spies to actually spy on each other to actually see if they actually found anything new. And some of them, and basically both of them, destroyed some fossils as well. It's because they didn't want any one of them to actually discover a new specimen, and basically they thought like, destroy this one, so destroy this fossils, because we don't want Cope or Marsh to find out what the specimen is. And that's how it actually kind of got out. And they discovered numerous species. They named numerous species. I mean, they were the pioneers of American paleontology. No matter how bad the feud was, they actually were the icons of American paleontology, and that actually has come up with numerous species like Triceratops, Ceratosaurus, Apatosaurus, Allosaurus, you name it. Some of the iconic dinosaurs were actually found by them. I mean, it's amazing to actually think of them as icons in paleontology, but they are icons in paleontology, especially in American paleontology. But then when you get to the 20th century, the beginning of the 20th century, you actually have a newcomer in paleontology, which is Barnum Brown, based in the American Museum of Natural History, along with Henry Fairfield Osborn. And that was when they actually discovered Transverse Rex. And basically, they actually believed that Transverse Rex was actually going to be the biggest thing that has ever happened in the science of paleontology. And basically, it turned out to be it was. And it still is to this day, is that probably Tyrannosaurus Rex was the find of the century, of the 20th century. It was basically that it was the biggest carnivorous dinosaur to be found at that time, and it stood for decades until it wasn't until the 90s. It was when we actually discovered dinosaurs that were bigger than Tyrannosaurus Rex, and so those two actually made it more of make it more of a science and actually do the science properly. To actually do it the right way. It's because Cope and Marsh didn't do it really the right way. They actually were basically just like, find a specimen, name it quick. Where basically Brown and Osborn, they were actually more of basically like, let's do it the right way, let's actually study them, let's actually make sure that we actually do it the right way. And so Henry Fairfield Osborn got the naming rights to Tyrannosaurus Rex because he was the founder of the American Museum, or not really the founder, but basically the leader of paleontology at the American Museum of Natural History. And so basically he actually got the naming rights. And then it wasn't until the 1920s and the 1930s you actually have another paleontologist that comes around in American paleontology, and that was Chapman Andrews. And this was the guy that actually was the inspiration for Indiana Jones. And there's a lot of, and basically some people that say that's a myth, but even though I think that's basically part of how Indiana Jones came to be. And so, but even though Chapman Andrews only did excavations outside of the United States, and basically he actually did a lot of trips to Mongolia and China, but even though he caused a rift between the Mongolian government and also the Chinese government to the Americans, just because basically it's that he took fossils and basically sent them to the American Museum of Natural History. It's because he didn't really think things through at that point, and he also destroyed specimens as well, just like Cope and Marsh, and basically the permission to destroy a specimen at that time, we actually had to RCA it, and RCA means Roy Chapman Andrews. And basically Roy Chapman Andrews helped make the discovery of dinosaur eggs, and that was really how they actually found out that dinosaurs did lay eggs. They probably had like a reptilian type of heritage. And then basically in the mid 20th century, between the 1950s and also the 1970s, it was when you actually have scientists that were actually studying fossils that were actually going to be very important and basically describe. And also the 70s is when we actually start to see different changes in paleontology and American paleontology. It was basically, we actually had to look at fossils very differently, as basically how the anatomy really is in some of these animals. Because like with Brontosaurus, the huge Brontosaurus debate actually started in the 1970s. It was basically, it's because one reason was basically when Marsh actually discovered Brontosaurus. He had a nearly complete specimen, and basically the only thing that was missing was the skull. And basically Charles Marsh actually thought, like, I'll go to another quarry nearby and see if there's a skull that I can actually find that probably might fit this. So basically he went to a quarry where basically he found Camarasaurus specimens, and basically he found the Camarasaurus specimen, and basically he just took the skull of a Camarasaurus and put it right on a dinosaur that the skull doesn't really belong in. And so pretty much that was a big mistake. And then basically in the 70s, scientists say Marsh made a huge mistake, and that was basically is that he took a skull of another dinosaur and put it on another dinosaur, and basically that was the wrong thing to do. It's because Marsh didn't really do the work necessary to actually figure out what skull actually belongs, basically the anatomy, basically. And so anatomy actually became huge in the 70s and the 80s, and that was actually the point where dinosaurs actually started, when you start to see museums have their dinosaurs stand in a different way. Because when we actually saw dinosaurs in the museums for so long, at that point was basically the dinosaurs' tails were dragging on the ground. They stood upright like us humans and all that. But then it was at that time we actually found out that they stood like birds. Basically, the spine is actually placed horizontally, and basically all the vertebrae actually basically stay in a horizontal direction, and that's the way it should be. And that's basically how it is in reptiles. That's how it is in birds, and that's because the spine stays in a straight line horizontally, because you don't see animals today that actually have a vertical stance like us, where the spine is actually vertical, because we're actually the exception of the rule. So basically like that. And so anatomy actually became very, very big in the late 70s and the 80s. But it wasn't until the 90s is when we actually start to actually find out what the behavior of some of these animals, were. And so that was when you actually start to see like we actually use modern animals to actually find out like what the behavior might have been for some like prehistoric creatures. Like we use lions to actually figure out the behaviors of saber-toothed cats. We use elephants and to actually figure out the behavior of sauropods and also woolly mammoths. We actually use like emus and ostriches to find out how theropods actually moved, that kind of thing. And also we use crocodiles to actually find out how theropods moved and how dinosaurs moved and all that, because that's how it was. And basically that was when paleontology took huge strides in American paleontology, and that was basically when American paleontology really kind of took off a little bit more, because we actually had scientists that are actually doing a lot of work and actually doing the correct work necessary to actually be sure that they actually have the information that they need to actually go through to go through the science. Because you had scientists like Jack Horner, Phil Curry, Tom Holtz, Ken Carpenter, and all those guys, and Robert Bacher. Robert Bacher was actually a well-renowned paleontologist even in the 60s. In the 60s, and basically he really didn't really become well known until the late 80s and then basically the 90s, and that was when he actually did a lot of really good work, and he wrote many books. And of course, Jack Horner is very famous for stirring up the controversy of whether Transverse Rex was a hunter or scavenger. And Phil Curry is a world-renowned Tyrannosaur expert. Dr. Tom Holtz is a world-renowned theropod expert. You actually have Ken Carpenter, who is an expert in armored dinosaurs and ceratopsians. And you have Andrew Farkey, who has actually done a lot of work on ceratopsians and hadrosaurs. And also you got scientists that actually done really good research on sauropods. And that's where we are today, is that we're still doing the right work necessary to actually do it the right way. And pretty much in American science, we actually prefer to actually look at other people's options, look at other people's hypotheses, and basically kind of look at them and see whether or not we find any flaws, or there's some things that could be right on there. And I mean, that's basically part of science. And basically science is basically pretty much coming up with a hypothesis and pretty much testing it out and have the evidence necessary to present it, and then pretty much go around and actually just see whether or not it holds through and get published and all that sorts of stuff. And all the guys in American paleontology. Phil Curry is more of a Canadian paleontologist, but even though he's done a lot of work in American paleontology as well, but even though all those things actually come into play into American paleontology, especially to the famous American paleontologists that have done a lot of work, no matter where they work for, whether they work for a university or otherwise in a museum. They actually have done a lot of work necessary to actually make sure that they have done the science correctly. And American paleontology will continue to grow, and also hopefully new American paleontologists come through, hopefully maybe me at some point, to actually do some incredible research. And that's what I want, and that's what I like to see out of some of these American paleontology. American paleontology is great research, great publishing, and hopefully new evidence comes by, making new discoveries every year, no matter how much the science has changed. Alright, that's it for now. Now next week will actually be a special episode, and we've got 2 dinosaurs already, and basically the dinosaurs are going to be Brontosaurus and Tarbosaurus. So 2 theropods, mean-looking theropods to actually talk about tomorrow. I mean, not tomorrow, excuse me. Saturday, the coming Saturday. And basically, those are 2 dinosaurs that I actually love to talk about, and I have pretty good information about them. So, but also to everyone out there that I'm still open for questions. You can still email me at dinochrist71@gmail.com, or otherwise you could go on my Facebook page, Prehistoric Facts with Dino Chris. Like the page, you can actually post the questions in the comments section on any Facebook post, but remember, keep your questions short and to the point. And also Facebook and email is open 24/7, so I'll be able to read your emails, and I'll be willing to read your questions, and I'll make sure that they'll get read on it. Make sure they'll get read on an episode, on the next Answer Questions episode, and hopefully you'll like my answers. If not, then that's okay. You know, you have an opinion, and I have an opinion, and that's basically what science is about. It's basically we come up with opinions, and we actually just stick by them if we want to, or not. You know, that's the way it is. And you can also follow me on Twitter at CSGRALL. That's my Twitter page. Follow me there. I post pretty cool stuff there. And also take care of the people around you. And also for you younger people out there, make sure to listen to your parents, your teachers, and your guardians. Those are the best motivation you can have for a good education. It's very important to have a good education. So with a good education, you get a good job in the future. All right, that's it for now. And hope everybody had a good 4th of July weekend. And I'll see you this coming Saturday.